All right, man. So this is Greg, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg. So Greg, I met you on I met you on Twitter.
Right.
Right. What
Yeah.
do you know your Twitter handle?
It's at Rugged Amethyst.
Awesome, dude. And all right, man. So we're gonna talk about Democrats, basically. And you live in a conservative state, right? We should say
Mhm.
that up front too.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna throw some questions at you and we can talk and just see where it goes, right? So this first, and we were talking before too, uh, leading up to this about some other stuff. But so one of the big ones, right? If you're on Twitter, if you're at a rally, if you breathe air, is that the two-party system is corrupt. You vote for one
Mhm.
of the parties, or just voting for corruption, basically. I don't know, man. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's kind of a privileged statement to make. It's kind of throwing up your hands. It's kind of like you're making a meal, and it's like you have 60% of the ingredients. So, well, I don't have cayenne pepper. Everybody starves today. I don't have my favorite sauce. I'm just not eating today. Everybody, I'm gonna starve. Like that's kind of how I see it. It's a privileged statement, which is the system has issues, definitely, but the system has a very impactful plays an impactful part on my community. For example, um, um, uh, Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland was on her way to a job. She got stopped by a cop. Um, she got into a dispute with him. She was arrested. Seemed like for nothing. Next thing you know, she ends up dead. You know, the
Right.
people who make those decisions about how do we prosecute this situation, prosecutors, sheriffs, deputies, cops, those are all political situations. They're all things that you can vote for, or all people you can vote for or not vote for. So if you don't show up, then we have people who are sometimes have malevolent intents who make decisions based on that. And a lot of us still don't have resolution on what happened to Sandra Bland. So if you say, well, I'm not just going to vote because it's both corrupt, what you're saying is you don't care, you're ambivalent, you're indifferent to things like that. And I have a big problem with that because that impacts my community. I live in the state of Texas. In Texas, it is harder to vote as a Black person than any other state in the union. So when you put your hands up and say, hey, both the parties corrupt, I'm just not going to vote for either one, you're empowering Republicans to strip our right to vote or to make it harder. You know, in Texas, they're passing laws where it makes it harder to vote absentee. Both of my parents are 70 plus. My mom is mid 70s. They can't stand in a line for 5 hours. They can't stand in a line for 6 hours. They can't stand in line an hour, particularly as they're passing laws where not only you can't bring chairs, you can't bring food. They don't, now they're questioning whether you can vote absentee. They're putting restraints around that. So this is very important to me. Both of my parents, they have fixed incomes, and Social Security is part of that. And we have multiple Republican candidates who say when they take over the House or when they regain power, they're going to try to privatize or get rid of or cut Social Security or Medicare. So my thing is, this has impact on me. So when I hear people saying that it's too corrupt for me to be involved in it, what I hear is the impact that it has on you. I'm ambivalent to that, and I hear that a lot on Twitter. Good luck in November. Good luck in the midterms. It's almost like they're hoping the Republican Party takes over so they can, target the African American community. And I take that personally. I do. And I don't want to hear, well, I live in a blue state, so my vote doesn't matter. Don't give me that. I grew up in a blue state. And for years and years and years, and we talked about this earlier, for years and years and years, the biggest problem is that we had a very abrasive Republican Party that would just do anything they could to muck up the works. It was a
Yeah.
very small. The Republican Party in the state of California has never been big and robust in my lifetime. It's been bigger than it is now, but they've always been saboteurs. We got to do what we got to do. You know what I mean? Like people act like harm reduction is not a thing. It is, particularly in my community. It is.
Yeah.
We had even the symbolic things like Juneteenth. A lot of people will say, well, the Black community needs more than that. We do. But we also need symbolic things like that. We also need representation. Biden's administration is blacker and has more women than I think any administration, including Obama administration, which was very diverse. The Trump administration was not that. Judicially, a lot of people say, judges don't matter. Almost 80 to 90% of the people that Trump appointed for federal judgeships were white men, period. Straight white men.
It goes to that thing we were talking about this earlier too, about what you hear when people say establishment Democrat, right? Or when people attack the Democratic Party or the establishment, because I think of an idea of what they're saying, and I don't think it matches what you're hearing.
Right. Well, number one, I think the establishment Democrat thing is a slogan. Well, I think it is. It doesn't have a lot to do with reality. But the other thing is, when I hear establishment Democrat, I hear Black folks.
Yeah.
I hear Jim Clyburn. I hear President Obama. I hear Vice President Kamala Harris. I hear the Congressional Black Caucus. That's what I hear. Because if you're talking about an establishment Democrat, which is one of those nebulous words that can almost mean anything, who's more establishment than Black folks? Who votes at a higher rate for Democrats than Black people? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And particularly Black women. So when they're talking about taking over the party, they're talking about the corruption of establishment Dem. They're talking about Black people, and that to me, I see that as a threat.
Yeah, you talked about being the difference between being an activist and being a legislator, right?
Right. Like, if you want to do the stunt queen thing and go to Nancy Pelosi's house with Justice Democrats and some Sunrise Movement and yell at her, that's a skill. It's a skill to be an activist. And we saw that during the Black Lives Matter protests. It's a skill to draw attention to your cause. And there are different skills that make you good at that may not make you good as being a legislator. But what I think people don't understand is that different skill set does not always translate. And so we have these activist stunts, and people like me are looking at Lauren Underwood, who are getting bills passed. And we're like, okay, we want to see the squad do more of that as opposed to, getting in a sleeping bag and sleeping on the steps of the Capitol or sleeping on the steps of the Supreme Court. Like we would rather you do things to pass bills to help us. And these are the same people that complain about incrementalism. Well, why are we doing these half measures? Why are we doing these things that are a drop in the pond? I was like, well, if you're an activist that doesn't do anything, you can't talk to me about incrementalism because you're doing nothing. Like if you're someone who's trying to argue that amendments are more, the amendments that you're trying to attach to bills are more important than people who write the bills, what kind of political conversation are we having?
And that's kind of interesting because we were talking about activists and even my past experience too. But talking about the idea of how the African-American community is framed, even by people on the right and the left.
Right.
And the approach to that, as opposed to maybe saying we need blue collar workers or we need middle class people, right?
Black people, we're in the working class. We have a middle class. We have a robust middle class. Saying almost everybody in my family went to school, has a good job. Like not everybody, but a lot of them. So I think a lot of times these conversations, we're talking about the white middle class and we get left out in the middle. It's like, well, we're there too. And the same things that bother them bother us. And so, when we have these conversations, particularly these conversations about race reductionists, and we have conversations about identity politics, to me, the issues that affect the middle class, you can't talk about without talking about race. Yeah. Because we saw in places like Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin, we saw union members who have voted for Democrats, all of them vote for Trump. And the statistics show that they voted for Trump because he spoke to their racial resentment more than any other candidate. So even though they're diehard, blue collar, working class union members, they voted for this other guy because he spoke to their racial resentment.
Right. And the idea of what African-American communities, I I do think it's a flawed argument, whether you're for third parties or not, to say, what have Democrats done for the African American community? Because it
Well,
insinuates negativity about what the African American community is, right?
yeah, right. Well, the other thing is, if you're white, you can't tell me. I tell you. You can't. We
Yeah,
can't have a
exactly.
conversation where you say, "Well, your schools are this, you're that." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa!" I grew up in Black community. So you
Yeah.
can't tell me what my experience is. That goes back to listening. The other
Yeah.
thing is, I listen very closely to how people talk about the Black community. Oh, yeah, there's violence everywhere. There's schools everywhere. I'm like, whoa, 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 you have a very low opinion about Black people.
Right.
I was like, my dad. Look, my dad has 10 brothers and sisters. My mom has 8 brothers and sisters. Do you think all of our family are all poor and uneducated and in jail?
It sounds a lot like what you might hear on Fox News.
Yeah, like I'm like, our community is not. Our community is like anybody else. We have
Yeah.
issues in our community, but we have a big and a robust middle class. We also have wealthy people. We also have people in the 1%. And these are not just people you see on TV, Kanye West, folks like that. I know personally people in the 1% that are Black, been Black all their lives.
Right.
So
Right.
like, our community is diverse, number one. Number two, when you talk about, when I hear people say, well, what Democrats have done nothing, I think that's a value judgment. Because my parents both went to segregated schools, both of them.
Yeah.
Like, this is not something in the past that no one knows about. Both of my parents went to segregated schools. My grandfather, my mom's father, was, even though he was an entrepreneur, was functionally illiterate. So was my grandmother. That wasn't because they didn't have a desire to learn. That's because they grew up in a place that would not allow them to learn. And the places that they went to school in were in hospitable, inhabitable places, run down. Sometimes they were shut down. They would go to school in places that didn't have any heat, didn't have any air conditioning when it was hot. Also, they grew up in poverty, so they had to work. So it wasn't like, well, you go to college, you go off to Europe for a year, come back and see what you want to do. It was like, no, you're 11, you're 12, you need a job. That's how they grew up.
Right.
And so, like, the experiences are different. Totally. And my family touches all of them. Right. And so when I hear someone say the Democratic Party has done nothing for Black folks, I'm like, well, you need to listen, number one. Yeah. Number two, when I start to list the things, inevitably they're like, oh, that's not a big deal. Well, I'm like, okay, well, the Democratic Party helped pass, civil rights bill. The Democratic Party, they helped pass voting rights bill. The Democratic Party helped more, Barack Obama did a lot for criminal justice, as far as, making sure that we get rid of a lot of these mandatory sentencing things. A lot of times when you have this conversation, they don't know what the Democratic Party has done for Black folks. And the reason they don't know that is because they don't talk to Black folks. Because the reason the Democratic Party has done these things for Black folks is not because they're this benevolent party. We're in them.
Yeah, it's something that put me in, on ice skates when in the past I've tried to make similar arguments, is that even using that term we said before, like establishment Democrats, well, who are these people in power in the Democratic Party? Yeah, I think some of it comes from just lack of interaction, honestly, with right. the African American community, and sometimes it comes from a good place, like we were saying before too, like, one thing that you'll hear, I will not vote Democrat, but I understand why maybe Black people will, because they're in this dire situation socially. So where I get it, but I live in a safe blue state, so I'm not going to. But that kind of discredits or takes away all the positivity that African American people have done from within the Democratic Party.
Right. Well, we're empowered within it. We're a driving voice in it. We're at the highest levels of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of reasons sometimes people don't want to vote for Democratic Party or want to vote third party.
How about switching over to something? This is a big one too, right? Okay. But I think that it could probably loop back to what we were just talking about, because it talks about priorities, I suppose. But a big one would be, especially right now, Democrats are warmongers, right? They're imperialists. They territorial expansion, NATO, the industrial military complex, this kind of speak. Maybe not saying Republicans are better, but saying this is why you vote third party, right? Because these people are killing people all over the world, right?
Right. I mean, I get that. And it resonates for me because I have a lot of people in the military in my family. My dad was a captain in my army. My uncle's a Marine. I have a cousin that just essentially, he joined the army about a year ago. My nephew just got out of the Navy. So I grew up in a military family. Nobody likes wars. And I'm certainly not going to sit here and defend the military industrial complex. I get that.
Yeah.
But I'm not one of those people that's pacifist, and I'm not one of those people who should be like hands-off isolationists. And the reason I say this is because just recently I've been doing a lot of studying about, and I talked to you about this, the Yugoslav wars, the Bosnian War, Kosovo, ethnic cleansing, differences in the communities from Serbians, Albanians, Croatians, Bosniaks. I also, did some research on, Iran and the some of the ethnic cleansing and some of the problems that their communities have. Like, these are things that I'm not saying the United States is benevolent, but these are some of the things that I'm like, I just can't turn a blind eye to. Like, I can't just be like, okay, well, it's involving war, we should just not get involved. I'm like, if you know the history of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, the war in Eastern Europe, Russia invading Ukraine should upset you. It's like, it's not a good thing, and it's not one of those things where there's all these things domestically we have to deal with. Why are we worried about that? Like, you kind of have to grow up a little bit. Some of these issues are some of these things that I wish my government would get involved in. Now, the United States is not blameless. I get that. But to just throw up your hands and being like, well, I've heard people saying, well, the Ukrainians need to just give up. You're not going to win, just give up. Or we could be spending this money instead of sending it to Ukraine, we could be doing other things. Yeah, we could. And I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that this isn't something that we shouldn't be involved in. Like Bill Clinton and NATO's decision to bomb places in when they were having the Yugoslav wars, the ethnic cleansing. It's very controversial, still controversial today. But when you hear about the things that were going on, I'm like, there's at least an argument to be like, okay, we can't just turn a blind eye to this. But it's like, to just be an isolationist and like, oh, we shouldn't just get involved at all. All we're doing is making it worse. And sometimes we do. But I'm like, I don't, to me, that's a cop-out. To me, it's too messy. I don't want to be involved in it. So I just don't want to involve myself. And then meanwhile, you're voting for this third party like Jill Stein. She's making all these promises. You're not holding her accountable or the third parties at all. Third parties have a slate of things they want to do. And I guarantee you 99% of it never comes to pass. And you know what they say? Good job, Jill Stein, give them hell. But Democrats, when they don't solve very systemic issues in 30 days, they're yelling at them like both parties the same. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you have the same type of accountability for Jill Stein?
You talked about too with having a practicality because the repercussions affect people in different ways, right? But also this idea of policy, right, versus structural issues and how they can interact, but how they could be different. I think a big one, for instance, might be someone who says, I'm voting third party because my priority is single payer healthcare. And Democrats aren't embracing that quick enough, or they're not embracing it at all. With the story that you just mentioned a few minutes ago, right? Yeah. Disparities in healthcare and reception of African-American patients, right? And how a policy like single payer doesn't address that structural issue, right? Of disparity of healthcare.
Right. Well,
like access doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to receive the same care, for instance, and how that's a deeper issue.
Not only that, number one, if you're a one issue voter in 2022, you're child's play. But like, besides that, statistics show, like I told you, a lot of times doctors don't believe our symptoms. They believe we can take more pain than we're saying. They believe we're only there for drugs. They believe that that we're lying about the pain that we're in. Not only that, is you see situations like in Mississippi where the Biden administration administered funds for water maintenance, millions of it. Republicans diverted those funds to other people. And so now Jackson doesn't have water. Now they're trying to make them pay for the mistake that they made. And so that's another thing. When we talk about single payer, it's like, well, Medicare for all, single payer, that'll solve everything. I'm like, okay, like I said, I'm the leftiest left dude that you will ever meet. Like there's nothing that there's no governmental program that you could talk about that I won't be like, okay, let's talk about it. Like I'm not opposed to it like that. But, we have seen situations where Republican legislatures and governors, when they get federal dollars, just refuse to disseminate it, particularly to my community in their states. Yeah. And so my thing is, okay, I live in Texas. We have a blood red legislator and a right-wing governor. You tell me that the federal government gives them $200 million to help our community, that we're going to see that money? I don't think we will. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we have to talk to those. We have to talk to those issues before we get there. And the fact that you just want to throw your hands up and say, well, at least you need to support it. And if you support it, I can't pay for it. Then that means like there's an ambivalence there. An indifference to my community. And that's something that I just can't respect. I can't, if you're ambivalent about my community because your pet peeve issue is not being, is not paramount to everything else, it's hard for me to accept that because there are huge consequences. Like I said, my parents have a fixed income. If they privatize Social Security, if they cut Social Security, that's going to be impacted. So it's like, so the one issue voter, I think it's a self-righteous thing. We talked about the power of self-righteousness. If you believe in a cause and you believe that this is something that's right, and that you just don't care about health control. I hear that a lot. If you don't support single payer for all or Medicare for all, why do you want poor people to die? Yeah. And I'm like, it's not that. I want you to explain to me how it works. And if you're impatient with that and you just need to support it, I'm like, no, I actually need to hear the details, the nuance of your plan. How is it going to work? How are you going to get this right-wing legislator in Texas? How are you going to get them to do it? Because you know what's going to happen. As soon as they pass single payer for all, which there is not support for in Congress, but somehow through a miracle they do, immediately all the right-wing attorney generals are going to sue. Yeah. And they're going to venue shop and they're going to find Trump appointees, which the same people who say they care for single payer said didn't care about the judiciary. Now we have a judiciary stacked full of unqualified Trump appointees. So as soon as they pass single payer, they're going to venue shop and they're going to find a judge who's going to rule against it. And then it's going to go to the right-wing Supreme Court, which we wouldn't have had if you voted for Hillary. So like my thing is, it all comes down to if you're a one issue voter and you've been for years, and you voted for third parties, in the Black community, we call this hustling backwards. You're hurting everybody else by holding on to your one issue. We know how the populace is. So when we make decisions, it's like you said, it's about practicality and realism. And we're like, okay, this is the most acceptable white dude we can select. And we know he's comfortable with our community because he worked for a Black guy. And for all of his life, he's been dealing with the African American community. It doesn't mean he's been right all the time. He'll tell you that the crime bill was an issue, and we can have a conversation about that.
Some of it's kind of that savior complex. We were kind of talking about that earlier to where, and like I looked at this stuff too, and I was like, whoa, Joe Biden talked about like, he had some messed up stuff in like the 70s about segregation. Like he said some very questionable things, but at the end of the day, upwards of 90% of African American women voted for him. And so at that point, what do I do? Do I ignore 90% of the African American women and assume that I know more about what racism is and about what should be acceptable to the African American community, for instance, and say Joe Biden's a racist and how could you have voted for him, instead of possibly considering that that's all been taken into consideration already? Right.
Well, I think the conversation that we don't have enough is a lot of the politicians that are still around that were from the 60s and 70s, and the electric at that time was pretty trash. like it's not like Joe Biden was saying things
I
that
mean,
were out
this
of
is America. I mean,
yeah, like it's not like he was saying things that was not out of the political spectrum at that time. I grew up in the 90s. The political dialogue at that time was pretty fucking trash. Tell me about how are you evolving? That's what I want to hear. Tom Cotton to this day is still like, we don't put enough people in jail. We're not putting enough people in jail. Like right now. Like if you talk to the rank and file in the Republican Party, they'll be like, yeah, we don't put enough people in jail.
what about the idea then? Because this is one too of, listen, if you vote third party, right, you bring down the power that Democrats and Republicans kind of hold over people. You might actually have a party that would listen to the Black community more directly, for instance, or be able to help more than what Democrats do or Republicans do. You can take down that whole power structure.
You don't have a large structural realignment without some people getting caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
Like we're just not going to wake up all one day and like, oh, we just made AOC queen for life. That it doesn't happen like that. Every time you have a large, and everybody realizes that this country is already on edge anyway. Like where violence is like right around the corner. We just had these people attack the Capitol.
So then, and there's a lot, but I think there's some core stuff, basic things of practicality, of that this is a job and that communities most at risk are risk adverse, right?
Right.
And, but what about if you're talking to, and we can wrap it up too, about why should people, and I know that it's not your job to be a marketing person for Democratic Party, but you vote Democrat, right? So maybe why do you vote Democrat? Why should other folks vote Democrat?
The reason I vote for the Democratic Party, one of the main reasons is I trust Black women. The other reason I vote for Democrats, it's like not the main reason, but it's one of the reasons. One of the most important reasons is because they value science and they value expertise. Like they're trying to fix problems. And I feel like a lot of these other third parties, Republican Party, they're trying to create problems. Like when I see them, when I see like the look at the Biden administration and their response to COVID as far as Trump. And I know people want to talk about this interview he had on 60 Minutes and they think that's irresponsible. But look, Biden sent free COVID tests to everyone. They passed COVID relief. He's asking for another $20 billion in COVID vaccine funding. He told everybody they should get some vaccines. They went over and over talking about people should wear their masks. Like, and we see, I think 50 million vaccine shots have been administered. That was the Democratic response to COVID. The Republican response to COVID, Trump was just incompetent.
Not good.
Like they were talking about ivermectin, and we see in places like Texas and Florida where they're actually trying to hide the statistics of COVID infections, COVID deaths. In Florida, they fired the woman who compiled those statistics. So it's a matter of competence. So that's another reason that I vote for Democrats. It's not even close. The other thing is the Black Party is empowered in the Democratic Party. They listen. They don't always get it right. They don't always do the right thing. But I asked some of these people who vote for third party, why don't these people who are running third party, if the Democratic Party hates them so much and they're always railing against them, why don't they run in Republican primaries? Because they know they'll get laughed out of the room. Bernie can't run as a Republican. AOC can't run as a Republican. So even these people in the third parties, they know that the Democratic Party will at least listen, even though they want to say that they don't. And that's the type of thing that I don't hear from both of those sides. The third parties, they don't want to hear anything Hillary voters have to say. They want to hear one word we have to say. And a lot of times, unless they're African Americans who support them, they don't want to hear what we have to say. And so the Democratic Party, in my view, they're the only political entity that they're willing to listen to us. And I see these third parties, these Republican parties, are people who are mad at us because we have agency in this party. So, when you think about all that and you think about the clear and present danger that the Republican Party presents to the African American community, because they do, there's also a harm reduction aspect there. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but I feel like we're most vulnerable politically because there's no political backlash for Republicans targeting us. They passed 1 million voter rights laws and nobody has been like, I'm going to stop voting for Republicans. So your third party candidate, who for the most part, it's hard for me to differentiate between them and a normal Democrat anyway. Like, to me, I have not seen, whether it be brand new Congress, Jill Stein, I have not seen on the left, I haven't seen any third party candidate that differentiates from a normal Democrat or Democratic policy. To me, it's kind of option 1A and kind of option 1B. The difference is the Democratic Party has agency and a history of, if they have majorities, that they'll pass legislation that may not fix the problem, but they're at least going to find something that's effective enough to impact it. These third parties, I have no fucking confidence that Jill Stein, if she got anywhere near Congress, will even know how to write a bill. Yeah. None at all. And none of these third parties have shown me that they can do anything but yell at Democrats that they haven't solved problems that they're contributing to. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. That's why I don't vote for third parties, because you're contributing to this party, you're yelling at somebody's not cleaning it up, and you're solving to this. Your panacea is to give us power. Well, what are you going to do in power? Well, we're just going to make people vote. We're going to bring people together. Okay, what's your plan? Oh, well, we're going to pass this. Well, how are you going to pass this? Because we have a block of conservative, Democrats. We have 4 or 5 Democrats in the Senate. All of the Republican parties are not going to vote for this. We have people in. How are you going to pass this? Oh, we'll do it. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, So I'm like, these are, when people talk about what have Democrats done for the Black community, this is what I bring up. I was like, it's not that easy. Like, you have to look at it from a holistic view. And I feel like a lot of these third parties they're not telling people to do that. They're just empowering people to yell at Democrats and the Democratic Party. And ultimately, that means they're yelling at us.